Hey everybody, how you doing? We're going to talk about an interesting topic today. What does old school and retro actually mean? And are we using those terms correctly? I actually got the idea for this video from the last video like this that I did, which everybody really loved, from a comment left by JMF Spike, saying that people misuse the word retro all the time and really should be using the term old school when referring to older games. And they make a really good argument, and that's going to be the main topic of this video, but we're going to be talking about some other stuff as well, such as should titles or branding or anything like that really matter when it comes to games or really anything. For instance, some people call me a YouTuber and I hate that. I never consider myself a retro gamer, old school gamer, anything like that, modern gamer, nothing. I just like to play games. And when you call someone a YouTuber, it's kind of like that's their job. And there's expectations that go along with that title, like you have to behave a certain way or you have to adhere to your audience and do certain things for other people, rather than just making videos and putting them online like I do. So I've never liked the term YouTuber. I'm just a guy who likes to make videos and discuss things with you guys. I will say that giving certain games titles helps to categorize them, especially if there's remakes or rehashes of older games. Kind of like how movies are done, like when the new Rambo came out, if someone says, hey, have you seen Rambo? Were you talking about this one? Or are you talking about the old Rambo? If Konami came out with a new Castlevania game and just titled it Castlevania, well, now we can say, are you talking about the modern Castlevania or the old school Castlevania? So in that sense, I agree with getting different games titles, but then keeping them to that label is where it kind of gets funny, in my opinion at least, because then you can give that title to people as well. So since I'm from the NES, Atari, early 80s, mid 80s era, does that automatically make me an old school gamer just because I'm from that time? Or am I an old school gamer because I play those type of games? Could somebody who's 15 or 16 who plays old Nintendo games, are they an old school gamer because they play the type of games? Or can they not be considered that because they didn't grow up in those times? In my opinion, it doesn't matter how old you are when you grow up. If you like those type of games, you like those type of games. But when you come out and say, I'm an old school gamer, it's like, oh, how old are you? Oh, I'm 15. That's where the conversation shifts into, how can you be an old school gamer if you're only 15? Or even nowadays, it could be closer to 20. So that's when adding titles or labels to people can become harmful and create kind of irritating conversation or bad blood between people, because you don't get to dictate how people enjoy their life. As long as it's not hurting somebody else, who cares how they want to call themselves? If they want to say they're an old school gamer and they're only like 15 or 16 years old, then that's fine. So let's hit back on the games portion. What makes a game an old school game? Are remakes or sequels considered old school or retro? Take Double Dragon Neon, for instance. That's a game that could never have come out years ago, but it shares the same type of gameplay as the earlier games in the series. It's a very older style of gameplay, but is it considered an old school game even though it just came out more recently? If you compare it to the older Double Dragon games, you look at it and be like, there's no way anyone could consider this an old school game. But put it next to something like a newer Call of Duty or Gears 5 that just came out, and you're like, oh, well, this is definitely not a modern game. So where does it fall? Or what about what the developers think? Take a game like Odalis or Volgar the Viking. And Volgar is a direct homage to an older game. They even make an appearance in the game. But what if the developers of those games say, no, my game is not old school or retro, it's just a side scroller, or it's just an action game? Now, who are we to say whether those games are now old school or retro or whatever? You could argue that Volgar is more old school than Double Dragon Neon, even though that came from an old school series. So is it due to the pixel art that makes these games old school? Is it because they look old school or because they play old school? What about games like Pure Solar that came out for the Genesis? And that just came out in 2007, but it is very old style RPG as you can get. Can that game be considered old school, or do we have to wait, 20, 30 years later, like 2027, and say that Pure Solar is now an old school game? Which is the point that I'm trying to make, is that where does the line get drawn where, why can't we just say this is a game? It's a fun game. but people can argue that too. And to be honest, I don't think it causes like a ton of arguments between people. Most of the time, the people that I talk to and the other gamers just consider them like good games or old style games. I just thought it was an interesting topic. Which brings me to the main point, retro versus old school. So when we Google the definition of retro, we get this: imitative of a style, fashion, or design from the recent past. And the definition of old school, used usually approvingly to refer to someone or something that is old-fashioned or traditional. And again, these are just the Google search definitions of old school and retro. You may have different definitions. Webster's dictionary could say something else. But I think that's what JMF Spike was talking about in their comment, is that we get the naming incorrect, saying that, you know, Mario Brothers or Final Fantasy III are retro games, when really, by these definitions, and actually I agree with this, there should be considered old school games. Retro games can take a look or gameplay, such as what we mentioned before, Odalis, Volgar, even Double Dragon 4, Celeste. Shovel Knight is a really good example of this as well. So when you look at it that way, I think they make a good point. Old school referring to something back then. That's why some people get the title of old school gamer, which after I thought about it for a while, that actually makes sense in my case. That's a title I wouldn't mind having because I was around in that era of the early video games. Not the earliest, obviously not before like 1980 when the Atari 2600 came out. Although that is the first system I ever played. First game I ever played on that system was Berserk. I was 4 years old and it scared the crap out of me. And that's probably why I like horror games today. But old school is a title I can get behind, but I also like retro games. I also like some modern games. How about the remake of Link's Awakening that's coming out soon? I believe they made some tweaks to it to make it more accessible to modern gamers. But I think those changes also kind of help the shortcomings that the Game Boy had back when it first came out. And you're going to have purists who say that the game is perfect how it is and things like that. I just got done playing the game recently live on stream, and there are definitely some annoyances when playing that game. Not because I'm playing it today, but it was the same annoyances I had back then. Like running into a rock without the bracelet and having to listen to those instructions every single time. Every time you pick up a map, you have to hear the directions on what the map does, or the compass. But my main gripe with that game was the menu system, how you can only have 2 items at once. And you have to switch between like the boots or a bracelet. And I think those are changes they made to the recent game. So do those changes deter so much from the original experience that you can call that game a modern game, even though it's based on a game that came out over 20-25 years ago? So where does the remake fall? Is it considered an old school game? Because everything in the game except for those tweaks are the same. The story, the type of gameplay it is, what's the title of that game? Which brings me back to my main point, is that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what kind of game it is. It's a game. You can call it a remake of Link's Awakening because that's what it is. And I'm not even going to get into the discussion of like remasters and stuff like that. Also, where does the old school title start? How old does a game have to be to get an old school title? 20 years old? That was the PlayStation N64 era. But take a game that comes out, you know, recently, like Gears 5. 20 years from now, are they going to be seen the same way as those games that came out in like the early 80s or 90s? Are people going to look back at those games and consider them old school? It's kind of hard for me to wrap my head around it because the way I see older games is that they were the foundation, for lack of a better term, of what we have today. They kind of started everything. Like Super Mario Brothers, that did a lot for side-scrollers. A lot of people say Donkey Kong was a big influence on things like that because it was the first game ever to have a type of story. But I think Super Mario Brothers did a lot for the gaming atmosphere and made a lot of changes just based on how it plays. It's super smooth even for a game that came out how long ago? Or even The Legend of Zelda, that was huge. The open world, how many items you can get, it had a great inventory system. Secrets, the game didn't hold your hand, one of the very first, at least in my opinion, NES hard games. Oops, and there I went, just gave a game a title. I'll challenge anybody who can try and play that game who's never played it before, never seen a walkthrough, anything, beat it on your own without any help. I don't know if that's even possible. So it's really up to everybody's opinion. Do you like putting titles on certain games, old school, retro? So what kind of gamer do you consider yourself to be? What kind of games do you play? What do you think about modern games now? Do you think they will also eventually get that old school tag? Or do you feel like that tag is only going to belong to those games that kind of started it all and pioneered a lot of things that we see today? Leave a comment down below. Let me know. I love having conversations with you guys about this stuff. Even if some people take it the wrong way and they get a little offended. That's okay. Everybody's got their opinion. So that's all I have for you guys today. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. This is the part of the video where I thank those users who support the channel through Patreon. Eric Cologne, Mike Muniz, Sam Torres, William Wend, Yaroslav Oruzov,